Right.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming to the William F. Buckley Jr. Program's final event of 2016. My name is Josh Altman, and I'm the president of the Buckley Program. Before I introduce our esteemed guest, I'd like to say a few quick words about the Buckley Program. The mission of the Buckley Program is to promote intellectual diversity on Yale's campus. We at the Buckley Program have a strong belief that Yale would fail its principal mission of educating the leaders of tomorrow if it neglected to prepare students for the complexities that exist outside of the ivory tower. The Buckley Program hosts lectures, debates, and conferences with guests who hold views that diverge from campus orthodoxy and offer a different perspective on issues that students will have to tangle with once they leave New Haven. This year, the Buckley Program has over 220 student fellows, and the topics of our events have included the Syrian refugee crisis, climate change policy, and the future of the party system in America. For any upperclassmen or freshmen who are interested in learning more about the Buckley Program, I recommend that you go to buckleyprogram.com to find out how you can become a student fellow. Now, I have the tremendous pleasure of introducing our esteemed guest for this evening. Born in Detroit to a single mother, Dr. Benjamin Carson graduated from Yale in 1973, where he was a student in Davenport College. He went on to receive, you could cheer for Davenport, it's okay. Not Silliman, but still good. He went on to receive his MD from the University of Michigan Medical School, and at age 33, he became the chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, which made him the youngest major division director in the hospital's history. Dr. Carson's accomplishments have earned him a place in medical history. He performed the first separation of craniopagus twins joined at the back of the head, in which both twins survived in 1987. He also performed the first fully successful separation of type 2 vertical craniopagus twins in 1997 in South Africa. Dr. Carson has written 9 books, 4 of which were co-authored with his wife Candy, whom he met here at Yale. He's also the recipient of the 2006 Spingarn Medal, which is the highest honor bestowed by the NAACP. In June 2008, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Dr. Carson and his wife are co-founders of the Carson Scholars Fund, which recognizes young people of all backgrounds for exceptional academic and humanitarian accomplishments. The fund has recognized more than 7,300 scholars, awarded more than $7.3 million in scholarships, and installed over 150 Ben Carson reading rooms around the country. After listening to Americans across the nation say that we are ready for a leader who will put the country before politics and will put the Constitution back to the forefront of policy and guidance, Dr. Ben Carson announced on May 4th, 2015, that he would seek the 2016 Republican nomination for president. He officially ended his bid on March 4th, 2016, and if you might have heard that this week President-elect Donald Trump announced his intention to nominate Dr. Ben Carson to be our next Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Please be aware that this event is being filmed, and also there are note cards being passed around for questions. We ask that you write your name, your year, and your residential college onto the note card and pass them to the aisles or to the front, and then we will be able to ask a few questions at the end of the event. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our next Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be back here at Yale again. I can remember having a class right here in this very room before. And, I want to talk a little bit tonight about common sense and the absence of labeling. It seems like we've become a society where we want to label everybody, and we don't necessarily use a lot of common sense. But, we're also a land of dreams. America is a land of dreams. And it was established by people who dreamed about being in a place where they could be free. Because so much of the world at that time was ruled by dictators and by people who took advantage of others. And they wanted a situation where they could do what they wanted to do, they could live where they wanted to live, they could say what they wanted to say, they could live according to their belief systems as long as those didn't negatively impact upon somebody else. And, you know, it was a wonderful dream. Now, there were some problems. The United States is not a perfect place, does not have a perfect history. There were bad things that happened here because it was inhabited by people. And people are imperfect. So wherever you have imperfect people, you're going to have imperfect happenings. And that's exactly what happened in our country. But the good thing is that people learn. And that's where the real hope is. If we learn from the mistakes that have been made. You know, Thomas Edison said he knew 999 ways a light bulb did not work. So he learned. And most of you have heard the cleaning formula 409. Why do they call it that? The first 408 didn't work. You know, they learned. Walter Dandy, the famous neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins many decades ago, first one to try all kinds of things. First one to operate on the posterior fossa. That part of the head, they said it's too small, it's too cramped, the tissue will swell, the patient will die. But Dandy operated on somebody with a lesion in the posterior fossa. And the tissue did swell and the patient did die. And he did another and they died, and another, they died. The first 13 all died. I can't even imagine what he said to the 14th patient who asked how the others did. He probably said, nobody's complaining. But, you know, the thing is, but the point is, he persisted. And, you know, now we're able to do posterior fossa operations very routinely and extraordinarily safely. But the key was learning from the mistakes, learning from things that happened before. And if you do that, there's no question you make progress. Particularly human beings with these magnificent brains that we have. And you might say I'm a little biased as a brain surgeon, but I got to tell you, the human brain is by far the most fabulous organ system in the universe. I mean, billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections, can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. Remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard. There is nothing that can compare with it. How many people here remember what you had for breakfast? Let me just see your hand. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, I'm impressed. Now, but what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Rather rapidly in most cases. Just to give you an example of how sophisticated your brain is. Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory meatus, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the oval and round window, set up a vibratory force in the endolymph, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction. From there, ascending bilaterally up the brainstem to the lamina meniscus, to the inferior colliculus and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobes to begin the auditory processing. From there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract to Victor Jury, retrieving the memory from the midi-hippocampal structure and the mammary bodies, back to the frontal lobes to start the Bet cell, motor response at the Bet cell level, coming down the corticospinal tract, across the internal capsule, into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary decusation, into the spinal gray matter, synapsing there, going out to the neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve and the muscle, so you can raise your hand. And that... And that's the simplified version, you know. They want to get into all the inhibitory and coordinating influences. We've been here all day talking about what your brain can do in a split second. But, you know, if we have brains that can do all of that, and we barely have to think about it, can you imagine what happens if we apply those brains to solving problems? Instead of allowing ourselves to be manipulated into opposite corners where we spend all of our time fighting each other, as opposed to combining our intellect and our resources to actually solve our problems. Our unity in America, I think, is our strength. Well, I use that brain to dream about what I want it to be as a youngster. I wanted to be a doctor. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. Even from a very young age, I loved anything that had to do with medicine, television, radio. They talked about medicine. I was right there. I even liked going to the doctor's office. So it tells you I was a strange kid. I would gladly sacrifice a shot just so I could smell an alcohol swab, And it was just the only thing that really interested me. But unfortunately, there were problems. My parents got divorced early on, and we had to move from Detroit to Boston to live with relatives in the tenements. There it was pretty horrendous environment, sirens and gangs and broken glass and boarded up windows and doors, murders. I had 2 cousins that were killed. I remember as a 9-year-old kid sitting on the ghetto stairs looking through the building across the street out of which all the windows had been broken. And there was a sunbeam shining through. And it made me think about my future. And I remember thinking, I probably won't live to be 25 years old, because that's what I saw around me. But my mother had very different dreams, and she worked extraordinarily hard, getting up, leaving the house at 5 in the morning, getting back at midnight, working 2 and 3 jobs at a time, extremely hard, because she was a little different than a lot of people around who were always saying, you got 2 boys, you don't really need to work, you can get aid to dependent children. She just didn't like the idea of being dependent on anybody else. And she also, wanted to have her own independence. And she, despite what you may have heard from people, she wanted to make sure that we didn't live in public housing because there was a lot of danger there. And she wanted to shield us from that danger. And a lot of people have said, well, Carson's a hypocrite because he grew up very poor, must have benefited from some government programs, and now he wants to remove all the safety nets in the government programs, which is a bunch of crap, by the way. People come up with this stuff because it fits their narrative. There is no way in the world I would ever want to do that. But what I do want to do is create ladders of opportunity so that people don't have to be dependent and they have a mechanism for climbing out of that state and becoming part of the fabric and strength of this country. That's what real compassion is about, in my opinion. It's not about patting people on the head and saying, there, you poor little thing, I'm going to take care of all your needs. It's about creating a mechanism whereby they can take care of their own needs and where they can have some pride in themselves so that they can do for their children. And these are the kinds of things that we have to start thinking about. And that's how, government should be used. Government should not be used to keep people in a dependent state. It should be used as a springboard and not as a hammock. And when we start thinking that way, it's going to work for us, because one of the things we have to think about is in this country, we only have 330 million people. Now, that sounds like a lot of folks, but compare that with China, 1.4 billion. India, 1.3 billion. It's not very many when you compare it to that. So that means we need to develop all of our people. And we have to start thinking in a collective way, what do we do as a society to make sure that we don't have 20% of our people who enter high school not graduating? What do we do to ensure that we don't send so many people to prison? I mean, think about the fact that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison inmates. Does that make any sense? Of course it doesn't. It means that there is a problem. there's a problem that creates a circumstance where we have so many people violating the law, but there's also a problem with the way that we punish people. And one of the things you have to think about is we have these excessively high recidivism rates. Now, that's because people go to prison with little education and little in the way of skills, and they come out of prison with little education and little in the way of skills. So what are they going to do? They go back to doing the same things they were doing that got them in there in the first place. That doesn't make any sense. One of the things that we should start thinking about is there a way we can change that trajectory? Is it possible that maybe if they're in there, we can make sure that they get some education and they learn some skills? And we provide them with a mechanism of obtaining a job when they come out so that they don't find themselves back in the same spot. And then they become part of the strength and fabric of the country, as opposed to somebody that we have to pay for in the penal system, which is very expensive, or the welfare system. Instead, they're contributing, becoming a part of the solution and not the problem. Until we start thinking that way, we're just going to have a continuation of these same kinds of problems, and we're not helping ourselves as a nation. And over the course of time, we actually increase the burden on ourselves, and we eventually collapse under that burden. These are what we have to start thinking about. And we have to start thinking also at a younger age, our children, and inspiring them to move in the right direction. I was so encouraged at the airport today when an educational consultant came up to me, and he said, you know, I am very familiar with the Carson reading rooms, and some of these schools, the kids' reading scores just explode. And these reading rooms are places that no little kid would pass up. They're decorated in whimsical fashions. One of them that's near Cape Canaveral, it looks like inside of a space capsule. And you look out of one window and you can see the Earth, and another window, you see stars, another window you see E.T., and there's all kinds of creative things around there to stimulate the imagination of the kids. But they get points for the number of books they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. In the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but it doesn't take long before, it starts having an impact on their academics. And we put them in all kinds of places, but we especially concentrate on Title I schools, where a lot of kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or poorly funded library. And if you can get them at a young age interested in reading, you change the trajectory of their lives, because 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. So if you truncate that way downstream, you don't have that problem upstream. Again, this is the way that we as a society have to begin to think. And when we think about communities that are disadvantaged, we have to think broadly about why they're disadvantaged and what can we do to change that dynamic. It's not just a matter of providing them housing security, but it's a matter of the right kind of education, the right kind of transportation, medical care. You need to have clinics that are readily available to people so that they don't find themselves going to the emergency room. You've got a diabetic foot ulcer. You go to the emergency room, it costs 5 times more than it would cost to go to the clinic. And in the emergency room, they patch you up and send you out. In the clinic, they patch you out and say, now let's get your diabetes under control so you're not back here in 3 weeks with another problem. Those are the kinds of things that really begin to save money. And if instead of just telling people, you go to this place and we'll pay for it, you give them some control, like a health savings account. Now, when a phlebotomy over here costs $16 and over here it costs $30, guess which one they're going to? They're going to the one that costs $16. Right now, they don't care. And people begin to take responsibility for their own health care, and they have ownership. All of those kinds of things make huge differences. And it's the kind of things that, we really have been paying attention to. And this is not a Democrat issue or Republican issue. This is an American issue. And we have to stop, finding ways to blame somebody for something and just solve the problem. Analyze the data and solve the problem. Makes all the difference in the world. And this is particularly important in the African American community. Many people say the young African American male is an endangered species. Why do they say that? Because there are so many young African Americans in the penal system. The most likely cause of death in our major cities, homicide for young African American males. This is a real tragedy for all of us because there's a lot of talent there that can be channeled in the right direction. And when you look at it in first grade, second grade, kindergarten, African American males, good students just like everybody else. So they start getting into the older category, something begins to happen. That peer pressure begins to kick in. And I think another thing that happens is they start learning about this great nation of ours in American history. And there's nobody who looks like them who really made much of a contribution to the development of our great nation. They say, well, maybe next year when I take world history. Same thing. Everybody wants to know, well, what did my ancestors do? Where do they fit in? Then they come home and they turn the TV on. Oh, there we are, playing basketball, baseball, football, rapping in those baggy pants, acting a fool on some sitcom. Now you begin to develop a different impression of what success for you represents. And it's not being a rocket scientist or a molecular biologist or the CEO of a major corporation. That's a problem. But the next thing you know, you're looking at the 6 o'clock news, you say, that's little Johnny being led away in handcuffs, trying to shield his face from the camera, having committed some heinous crime because he didn't see another way. He recognized that he's not going to be the next Michael Jordan or the next Puffy Daddy or whoever, So, and then he gets involved in these things. It's a problem. It's a big problem. It didn't have to happen, though, because, anybody could have taken that young man by the hand when he was 6 years old and walked down the streets of New Haven, Connecticut, and given him a black history lesson he would have never forgotten. He could have started by pointing to his shoes and saying, it was Jan Montsliger, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, which revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. And you step on that clean street, you tell them it was Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper. And down that street comes a big refrigerated tractor trailer truck, and you tell them it was Frederick Jones who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes and trains and ships. And it comes to a stop at the red light. You tell them it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal. And while you're talking about him, how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you talk about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you'll see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that opportunity to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, the first woman of any nationality in America to become a millionaire on her own efforts. And you'll walk past the hospital and you talk about Charles Drew and his contributions to blood banking and understanding the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, had an operative mortality rate of less than 1.5%. You look up at the surgical light, Thomas Edison. You didn't know he was black, did you? Well, he wasn't, but his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was. Lewis Latimer came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, invented the electric lamp, pioneered incandescent and fluorescent lighting, diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell, was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people have never even heard of him. You walk past the railroad tracks. Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. In fact, Elijah McCoy had so many inventions, when something new would come out in the industrial arena, they would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? That's where the term came from. You got racists like David Duke talking about the real McCoy, don't even know who he's paying homage to. So, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. Because, I could take that same walk down the street for virtually any nationality in this country, and I could point out tremendous contributions that were made. And that's one of the reasons that this country accelerated the way that it did and reached the pinnacle much faster than anybody else, because we had so many people from so many backgrounds with so much talent. Our diversity is not a problem, it is a strength. And we need to recognize that and stop allowing people to drive wedges between us for silly reasons. When I was practicing neurosurgery and I would open up somebody's head and I'd be operating on their brain, I guarantee you I could not tell you what race they were. I couldn't tell you what sex they were. I couldn't tell you any of that. We have to start thinking about what's important, not what's superficial. Superficial things, that's for people and animals and things that don't have deep intellectual capacity and the ability to look beyond the surface. And they're all hot and bothered by things that really don't matter, and they never get in-depth analysis of what's going on. And we can do so much better than that. Well, interestingly for me, I benefited from my mother's dream. We were eventually, after a couple of years, able to leave Boston, come back to Detroit, not back to the home that we had left. Couldn't afford to go there, but still in a multifamily dwelling. But at least she was independent, and I was a 5th grade student. I was the worst student you can imagine. You have a hard time imagining that for a Yalie. But, my nickname was Dummy. That's what everybody called me. And, I believed it too. I didn't think that I was very smart. But, again, my mother was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought him home anyway. But she was always encouraging me and telling me what I could do as opposed to what I couldn't do. And it made a huge difference in terms of what I did. But, I was the kind of person who reminds you a lot of some of the things you see on television. Have you ever watched any of those man-on-the-street interviews on television where they go to places like college campuses and they ask people really basic stuff like, what's the meaning of Labor Day? And they'll say, doesn't that celebrate women giving birth? I mean, they don't have any, they just don't have any idea of what's going on. And that's kind of frightening because, our founders, particularly Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson, said that our system and our freedom is based on a well-informed and educated populace. And if they ever become anything other than that, our freedoms will begin to erode. Why? Because dishonest people would easily be able to manipulate the populace. And that's why it is so vitally important to be well-informed and to make sure that people in your sphere of influence are well-informed. And part of being well-informed is being willing to talk to people, to discuss things. One of the problems that we have is that people are afraid to talk about things because somebody might call them a name. We need to get away from that. We don't have to agree about everything. In fact, I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. And, we just need to be able to talk. And a lot of times you'll find that you're not nearly as far apart as you think you are, but you have to be willing to engage in the conversation. Remember what happens when people get divorced. They stop communicating. They stop talking, and then they start talking about each other. The next thing you know, their spouse is the devil incarnate. This is what happens on a larger scale in our society when we're unwilling to engage in intellectual discourse and in civil discourse. And it's something that I hope all of you will begin to institute in your own lives with the people around you today. And even if you don't agree with someone, you can still talk about why you believe what you believe, why they believe what they believe, and a certain degree of understanding and respect begins to develop. And in many cases, you discover you're really not very far apart at all. You don't really have a lot to be, unhappy about in a situation like that. I hope some of you are journalism majors and that you want to become involved in the media. I hope some of you are. And I hope that because I think you can do a lot for our country by realizing this. The press is the only business protected by our Constitution. There's a reason for that. It's because they're supposed to be objective and they're supposed to inform the people so that the will of the people can direct the nation. When they engage in manipulation and they take sides, they distort the original intent of this nation. And it's going to take people of courage and integrity to return the press to what it needs to be in this country. It's going to have to be almost a revolution of young people who recognize that if we don't have honesty and trust, we cannot long survive. And if you look at pinnacle nations that have preceded us, one of the things that preceded their demise was distrust and corruption and the acceptance of corruption. We have an opportunity to learn from those things and to make the appropriate changes. Well, fortunately for me, my mother won the battle, and she got me to start reading. And she got my brother to start reading. And that made a profound difference in our lives. I began to read. I got to the point where I couldn't wait to get home from school so I could start reading my books. I started knowing stuff that nobody else knew. The same students who used to call me dummy were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, it just really changed the trajectory of my life for a while. But then when I got into high school, I had another problem. I ran into the worst thing a young person can run into, peers. P-E-E-R-S. That stands for people who encourage errors, rudeness, and stupidity. And, I got caught up in that, went from an A student to a B student to a C student. I didn't care. I was cool. High fives, low fives, pats on the back, doing the Detroit strut. You've seen the Detroit strut, right? So, I was cool. It was all good. And I wasted a whole year before my mother got me to realize that it wasn't what you wore on the outside, it was what was up here that made the difference. I got back on the stick. I became an A student again. Guys didn't like it. They would call me Nerd Poindexter, Uncle Tom. But I would always shut them up by saying one thing. I would say, let's see what I'm doing in 20 years, and let's see what you're doing in 20 years. And they must have believed me, because when I graduated from high school, they all voted me most likely to succeed, which means they knew what was necessary. They were too lazy and trifling to do it themselves, and therefore they wanted to impose their rules on everybody else so that they wouldn't achieve also. Fortunately, I was able to see through that. But when I got back on the right track, one of my goals in life was to be a contestant on my favorite TV program. It was called GE College Bowl. Now, none of you remember that. This was way before your time. That was back when they had good television. And, it came on every Sunday at 6 o'clock. They would pit two schools against each other. And they had 4 contestants on each side. And they would ask questions about history and science, geography, math. I was really good in all that stuff. I was gung-ho. I was going to be in college bowl. But they would also ask questions about classical music and classical art. Now, there was no way at Southwestern High School in inner city Detroit that you were going to learn anything about classical art or classical music. I mean, at my high school, if you said van go, they would have said, put gas in it, the van will go. I mean, you'd have had no idea what you were talking about. So I just made an executive decision. I would get on the bus, go downtown to the Detroit Institute of Arts, roam to those galleries day after day, week after week, month after month, till I knew every picture, who painted them, when they were born, when they died, what period it represented. I was listening to my radio, my portable radio, Bach, Telemann, Mozart. Kids in Detroit thought I was nuts. I mean, imagine this, a black kid in Motown listening to Mozart. And I tried to convince them that the Mo in Motown was for Mozart, but nobody was buying it. And I even determined which college I would attend based on that program, because I had enough money to apply to one college. I said, I'm applying to the college that wins the grand championship in College Bowl. Well, that year, the grand championship was between Harvard and Yale. And Yale demolished Harvard. So I didn't want to go to a school with a bunch of dummies, so and fortunately, Yale accepted me. But the year I came here was the year College Bowl went off the air. I know it's a sad story, but interestingly enough, years later, when I decided I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, I decided I would apply to Johns Hopkins because it was best known for neurosurgery. Cushing, Dandy, Walker, all the biggest names. The only problem is they only took 2 people a year out of 125 top applicants, so how was I going to get to be one of them? When I went for my interview, George Udvarhai, who was in charge of the residency program, was also in charge of cultural affairs at the hospital. So we talked a little bit about medicine, neurosurgery, how the conversation turned to classical music. We talked about different composers and their styles, and conductors, orchestras, orchestral halls. The man was on cloud 9. There was no way he wasn't taking me in the program, because he had to have somebody to discuss these things with. And it is so important to have a broad base of knowledge, not to allow yourself to be pigeonholed to one little area. Many people say that today's college graduates will have at least 3 different careers. And that's why, in order to give yourself the options as things change, you really need to have a broad base of understanding. That's one of the reasons that, I did non-traditional things during my career. Like become a board member at Kellogg or Costco. And people say, but you're a surgeon. You can't know anything about business. Why do people say stupid things like that? I don't know. They just assume that you can only know this little thing and you can't possibly know anything else. That just shows you that they have pea brains themselves. But at any rate, getting, my career here at Yale was wonderful. But one of the interesting things that happened is I would go back home in the summertime to try to get a job in Detroit, and it was difficult because Detroit was not doing well in those days economically. The big three automakers were doing poorly. And they were saying, there's going to be trouble in Detroit this summer because the kids can't get jobs. But you know what? I would always get a job. And it comes from a very important concept, thinking out of the box. Instead of looking at the want ads and the posters, I would get on the bus and I would just travel until I saw a bunch of little businesses, and I would get off the bus and go knock on the door and say, "Hi, my name's Ben Carson. I'm a student at Yale. I'm home for the summer. I'm looking for a job." A lot of those places didn't have an advertising budget, but if you showed up on their doorstep, they had a job for you. But one summer was particularly difficult. So I remember when I was applying to Yale, I did a regional interview at the Young and Rubicon advertising firm. So I went to the Young and Rubicon building, got on the executive elevator, went up to the penthouse, waited for the secretary to turn her back, and I went to the guy's office, and he said, "Benjamin, good to see you. How are things at Yale?" And I said, "Things are great, but I'm home for the summer. I can't find a job." He said, "Did you apply here? Did you go to the personnel office?" I said, "Yeah, they're not hiring any students this summer." He picked up the phone, called the personnel director, said, "There's a young man by the name of Ben Carson on the way down there. Give him a job." So I had a job that summer too. Non-traditional, out of the box, but it worked. But then one summer I was working as a highway supervisor for the crews that clean up the garbage along the roads. You see the big plastic bags and they're going along. Well, there was only one problem. Guys didn't want to do the work. And I didn't want to be paid as a supervisor if they weren't doing the work. So I got the guys together. I said, "Look, guys, you don't want to be picking up trash in the hot sun, right?" They said, "You're good, do it right." I said, "Okay, I have an idea. Why don't we start at 6 in the morning?" They said, 6 in the morning? You crazy? What are they teaching you at that fancy school? I said, "No, at 6 in the morning, it's cool. Your job is to pick up 100 bags of garbage. You have 8 hours to do that. Here's the deal. If you do it in 7 hours, I'll still pay you for 8. If you do it in 6 hours, I'll still pay you for 8. No matter how much time it takes you to do it, I'll still pay you for 8. You have never seen people work like this before. By 8 a.m., they would have 200 bags, whole stretches of highway, and the people who ran the program were just flabbergasted. And they would say, "Carson's crews are amazing, but we never see them." But the thing is, they got twice as much work done as anybody else, and it was a win-win-win situation. And that's what can happen when you think out of the box, and you actually target something specific, and you apply the intellect to solving that problem without necessarily considering tradition, or what other people have done. And that's the same thing that happened throughout my medical career. I was involved in a lot of controversy in my medical career because I wasn't satisfied when something wasn't working well, like with achondroplasts, the little dwarfs. 7% of them used to die in infancy because their brainstem was being compressed by complex bony formations at the base of the skull. It was so tight when people would try to go in and free it up, there wasn't enough room, and they frequently made them worse or even kill them. And I was at a conference in Rome, and it was the first international conference on human achondroplasia. After sort of the world's geneticists and people had weighed in, it came my time to talk. And I talked about a new procedure we had developed to decompress this area safely. And they said, "You surgeons are the problem. If you leave them alone, only 7% will die. You guys think you can do anything." And they were just outraged. Well, I came back to Hopkins, continued doing that operation. people were complaining. They were complaining to the dean and to the president of the hospital. Carson's a wild man, to the Maryland Medical Society, even to the AMA. But by that time, I had done enough of the cases that I could reveal the data. Not a single patient had died. And that's the interesting thing about medicine and science. Data actually counts, not so much in politics. But, it changed, and people started doing it. Now people do those operations all over the world, and the infant mortality rate for achondroplasia is the same as it is for everybody else. But you have to sometimes be willing to endure criticism. It's going to happen because people have a tendency to like the status quo. They don't like to move off. They don't like to start doing things any differently than they've been done before. So whatever your endeavor is, whatever you decide to go into, just understand that you may think it's the greatest idea in the world, and it may be, but you're not going to get it through without criticism and without resistance. You just have to understand that and be willing to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And by opposing in them, no, I'm not going to do it. But, the thing that I want to end with before we take a few questions is asking you the question, what is success? Is it a big house, a lot of cars, a yacht, private plane, big bank account? Well, in 1997, I was asked to come to South Africa to head up a team in an attempt to separate type 2 vertical craniopicus twins. Siamese twins joined at the top of the head facing in opposite directions. There have been 13 attempts to separate those kinds of twins before, none of which had been successful. So I knew this was going to be a great medical challenge. But it was also going to be a great social challenge because it's going to be done at the Medical University of South Africa at Medunsa. It's a major black teaching hospital, always the stepchild throughout apartheid and in the post-apartheid period. This was going to be their chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with Cape Town and Johannesburg and all the other great universities. And I wasn't ready for all that social pressure. I said, Lord, you're going to have to show me something here because greater, more talented people than me have tried and failed. And as I was studying their anatomy on our 3D workbench, which can take the CAT scan, the MRI, the angiograms, all the imaging, merge it with a computerized image into a 3D image you put on your goggles. And I was noticing the common drainage system was narrower centrally than it was peripherally. Now, the traditional neurosurgical literature said you should decide which twin to give the drainage system to and separate them over 3 or 4 operations with several weeks to months in between each operation to allow collateral circulation to form. But since it was narrow centrally, it occurred to me that new circulation would probably pop up during the course of one long operation. So I proposed that, and they said, you're the boss, we'll do whatever you want to do. Well, it was 2 days before New Year's of '98, and there was a big sign over the OR, God bless Joseph and Luca Banda. And they were having song service and prayer service, and I was thrilled. I said, can we bring in a stereo? I like to listen to classical music and inspirational music while I'm operating. 19 hours into the operation, we were 3/4 of the way finished. The part that remained looked impossible. The blood vessels were engorged, they were entangled, they were adhesed. We stopped the operation, we went into conference. I suggested that maybe we could cover the area over with skin and come back in a few months, and they would have developed enough collaterals that we could then cut through that section. The doctors from Zambia, where the twins were from, in South Africa, said it's a great idea, and I know it would work at Johns Hopkins. but we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die. Now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't have all my fancy equipment I have at Hopkins. I had my surgical loops, my scalpel, and a prayer on my lips. I said, Lord, it's up to you. Went in there and started cutting between those vessels that were so thin you could see the anesthetic bubbles coursing through, just daring you to make a nick in them. And I thought about the first case of conjoined twins that we did. We used 60 units of blood. And the second, we used 80 units of blood. And I was thinking, there's not enough blood in South Africa if we get into this. Well, to make a long story short, when I made the final cut that separated those twins, over the stereo system came the Hallelujah chorus. And everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished that operation after 28 hours and 3 units of blood, one of those twins popped his eyes open and reached up for the endotracheal tube. By the time we got to the ICU, the other one did the same thing. Within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And 2 years ago, they graduated from high school. But you know, that was not the success. That was not the success. The success you had to be there to witness was the reaction of the people. This was done in their hospital, in their country. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof. They were literally dancing in the streets. And I believe that that's what real success is using the talent that God has given you to elevate other people. Thank you.
So we have a few questions that have been spent on note cards. So Dr. Carson, the first question is, what is the biggest difficulty that you face as a Christian in an America that represents an increasingly secular society?
Well, the biggest problem as a Christian, I think what we have to do, all of us, is recognize that this country was founded on freedom of religion. Not freedom from religion, but freedom of religion. Basically, it means you can believe whatever you want to believe. And that is something that everybody must keep in mind. If you're an atheist, you still have a religion. And you're welcome to believe that. But you need to have respect for people who believe something differently. If you're a Christian, you need to have respect for the people who have other beliefs. I remember I was involved in a public debate in Hollywood about science and religion. And on the other side was Richard Dawkins. Some of you probably know who that is. He's sort of like the foremost evolutionist who thinks that anybody who believes that God created the earth is a total moron. So at the end of the debate, I said, I think you won because you convinced me of one thing. You came from a monkey and I came from God. But the point being, it is very important. It is very important for us to let people believe what they want to believe, Christians included. We must allow everybody to believe what they want to believe. One thing I have to add, one caveat. This is a very serious statement. Our nation is founded on a certain set of beliefs and is governed by our Constitution. And I think we are a nation of immigrants. But when people come to our country, they have to believe that our Constitution is the governing document of the land. And if they don't believe that, they really should go to a place that's compatible with their own beliefs. And it's the same as in your house. You know, we are welcoming to all kinds of people, but you probably wouldn't invite somebody to come live in your house who had beliefs that were completely opposite of yours, who didn't want to eat your food, who didn't like your furniture, who didn't abide by your rules. You probably would say, you know what? There's a nice place down the road there. Why don't you go there? That's just common sense. That's logic. Now, some people would say, no, they'd have some kind of name to call it, some kind of phobia. But the fact of the matter is, it's just common sense. And that's why it's so important for people to learn how to articulate what their beliefs are in a way that's easily understandable to other people. And, you know, the point that I just made, I would gladly argue that with anybody, because I don't think anybody could come up with a logical argument that's opposite of that.
The second question comes from Dazia, a junior in Pearson College, who asks, do you believe there are common sense cues that establishment politicians on both sides of the aisle missed that, had they paid attention, would have shown them how divided and dissatisfied the American people were?
Read that one more time.
Okay. Do you believe that there are common sense cues that establishment politicians on both sides of the aisle missed that, had they paid attention, they would have shown them how divided and dissatisfied the American people were?
Okay. Without question. You know, I don't believe that political parties are the solution for us in this country, because there's so many people who grasp the ideology of a party and completely relax their brain. And that's probably not the right way to do things. You know, we need to be Americans first and not Democrats or Republicans first. And until we learn that, we're going to continue to miss the common sense solutions. Most of the problems that face this nation are not Democrat or Republican problems. You know, you look at something, for instance, the tremendous national debt. I mean, it's approaching $20 trillion. Now, who is going to bear the brunt of that? Not my generation, even though we ran it up. It's your generation. And a generation after that that has to bear the brunt of that. That's not fair. And we need to be working extremely hard to fix that. I want you to just think about how much money that is. If we're just talking about, let's dial it back to $18 trillion, and you wanted to pay it back at a rate of $10 million a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, $10 million a day. It would take you more than 5,000 years. That's what we're doing to people who are coming behind us by being fiscally irresponsible. And that bears no political label. That just bears the label of stupid. And, you know, it's not like it hasn't happened before. You know, you go back to 17th century Spain or 18th century France. Or you look at, the British Empire. You look at ancient Rome. You look at ancient Greece. They all did it. And they all suffered the same consequence. And we will too. We have enough time if we can recognize that. But if we don't recognize it, the collapse that comes will affect everybody. Doesn't matter what your party is.
In the spirit of Bill Buckley's principles of ideological diversity, what is one thing you find compelling from the liberal ideology?
What is one thing for the liberal?
Yeah, what's one thing you think liberals might have right or find compelling?
Something good out of the liberal?
Question said compelling.
Just kidding. I used to be a liberal. I grew up in Detroit, a very liberal place. And then from there, I came to Yale, a very liberal place. And from there, I went to University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, a very liberal place. And from there, I went to Baltimore, a very liberal place. So how did I end up not being liberal? I'll tell you. I don't consider myself something that can be categorized with a label. And if there's a party that I belong to, I like to call it the logical party, the party of common sense. And there are some liberals who have common sense and who mean well. They, in many cases, think of themselves as being extraordinarily compassionate and looking out for others. And I think that is a good thing. It needs to be taken to the next level and ask yourself, are the things that your compassion is causing you to do actually helping people? Or is it just making you feel good like you've done something? And that's the same thing that conservatives must ask themselves. We must all ask ourselves that question. Are the things that we are doing actually accomplishing the goal that we set out to solve? Or are they just making us feel good?
Two more questions. First one is, from your experiences growing up in Detroit, what should a conservative anti-poverty agenda look like?
What should the conservative anti-poverty agenda look like? Well, first of all, if a person gets a good education, it really doesn't matter what their background is. They can write their own ticket. So first and foremost, we must be looking at mechanisms for providing a very good education for all of our people. And that's one of the reasons that for years I have advocated for vouchers so that people could have school choice. Because there are a lot of people who are stuck in failing schools. And they have no options. And I know a lot of people say, well, why are those kids in Cleveland and Detroit, Philadelphia, dropping out of high school at such high rates? In many cases, more than 50% dropout rate. It's not necessarily because they don't want to be educated. It's because they're in failing schools, and they're looking around, they're saying, I'm not getting educated, so why am I here? We need to change that dynamic by not only giving them school choice, but giving them vouchers and a mechanism to exercise that. That's one key. The other key conservative agenda is we must actively manifest compassion. For instance, you look at the fact that there are a lot of young women who get pregnant out of wedlock. Well, what happens? First of all, in many cases, probably most cases, their education ends with that first baby. And if they have a second baby, forget about it. That's a problem. It's a problem for them. It's a problem for their child, who is 4 times as likely to grow up in poverty. And it's a problem for our society, because we're going to have to support it. So what we need to be thinking about is, how do we get that young woman educated? That means providing a mechanism for her child or children to be taken care of and getting an education for her so that she learns how to support herself and passes that on to her children. We have to be able to think long-term like that. We need to be thinking in terms of, how do we use our resources? For instance, overseas right now, there's over $2.1 trillion sitting there because we have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. It's not being repatriated. Conservative agenda should say, let's find a way to bring that money back. For instance, a 6-month tax holiday in which it can be brought back without taxes, but 10% of it must be used in enterprise zones for infrastructure and to create jobs for people who are unemployed, underemployed, or on welfare. It would be the biggest stimulus since FDR's New Deal, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. That's the kind of thing that will make a huge difference, a huge jumpstart. But more importantly, it gets corporate America once again thinking about investing in the communities around them, which is something that used to be done to a much greater degree until the government took it over. I don't think it's the government's job. The government is there to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but not to impose it as they think they're doing good.
This last question gets away from politics a little bit. Given your expertise, could you provide a prognosis? On September 30th, I had a small grade 3 astrocytoma removed at Johns Hopkins. Currently, I am doing 6 weeks of
chemotherapy?
It's not chemo, but 6 weeks of radiation, and I'm a healthy 21-year-old. What's your take?
My take is, I no longer practice medicine. But you're in the right place, and you're doing the right thing. And, I've seen a lot of people with grade 3 astrocytomas who are young, who have beat them with the very treatment that's just been described. So that's good. And I hope some of you are pre-med here, and that you're thinking about medical careers despite all the things that you're hearing. Don't let those things discourage you. There is nothing, quite frankly, as gratifying as medicine. And when I was running, one of the things I looked forward to was seeing my patients. I operated on 15,000 people. So there would be patients almost every place that I went. I remember one place I went, 10 of my patients were there. I said, let's just have clinic. But, to see people years later, in many cases, coming to me saying, you operated on me when I was, a child. I want to introduce you to my children. I'll tell you, there is nothing like that. I was in Kentucky, and a family came up to me and they said, do you recognize this young man? And I said, he looks familiar. Because that's what I say about everybody. They said, you operated on him when he was 1 year old. You did a hemispherectomy, an operation where you take out half the brain to stop intractable seizures. And they said, he just graduated from college, #1 in his class. I'll tell you, that kind of thing, it just makes you feel so good. And then there was one young lady. She came up to my wife, and she said, you're Dr. Ben Carson's wife? She said, you know, your husband operated on me when I was still in my mother's womb. And now she's grown up, statuesque, beautiful, self-employed. And that's one of the reasons you'll never convince me that what's in a lady's womb is a meaningless bunch of cells. It's so important. But the whole concept of life, and not just life, but quality of life, that's really what it's all about. And I think that's where success comes in. No matter what you decide to do, are you making it a better place? Are you bringing quality of life to the people around you? And if the answer to that is yes, those other things don't matter. You are highly successful. Thank you so much.